This is Dr. Rich Schuttler with lesson number 10, titled Population and Sampling, inside of Chapter 3, the Methodology chapter. This is a continuation of taking the B out of ABD program, which stands for taking the but out of all but dissertation. In this lesson, I'm going to give some information about survey population and sampling, in particular, how you could or should relate your information in your Chapter 3. It's beyond the scope to be able to teach you everything about survey populations and sampling, but at this stage, if you're writing Chapter 3, you should already have a pretty good indication of not only your research method and design, but also how you plan to collect your data. I will provide several examples from some of my mentees as I conclude this lesson, and then I'll end it with a reflective summary. The first thing I want to do is share a couple definitions, and the definitions come from the Council of Graduate Schools. This was published in 1991 when they talked about the role and nature of doctoral dissertations. It's a policy statement, and it's from Washington, D.C. Significant substantial is really the essence of what a doctoral dissertation should be. This citation may have been updated since 1991, but the definitions I'm sure will be pretty much the same. The significance means a significant piece of work provides information that is useful to other scholars in the field and ideally is of such importance that it alters the thinking of scholars in the student's field of study. Think about your dissertation. Is your dissertation going to make a difference? I'm sure that it will, but the time to make sure it will is now, as you're working on Chapter 3 and you're enriching your work. The Council also suggests that significant dissertation work has to do with the choice of topic and with the impact of research. Depending on what university you're in, you may actually have a requirement to address a specific body of knowledge, such as leadership, or perhaps it's on change and how change makes a difference in society. Is your work going to be significant in providing some useful information to help lessen a problem that somebody else has? And substantial is referred to as an extensive laboratory investigation of a question that ranks highly in national funding priorities and therefore is of significant interest to a large external research community. Now, your dissertation may not align directly with this, but I look at it in the sense of, is your work going to create research that makes a difference? And is it going to contribute to a related body of knowledge? If so, then I believe you're going to have a significant, substantial dissertation. In essence, what these words mean is that there's a difference between doing research, perhaps with 25 people in a small division of a company, or perhaps a company of only 25 people, as compared to doing research with a larger organization. Good research with a company of 25 people is needed, and I do that often with my research as a consultant. That would not necessarily be dissertation worthy. And when we start talking about the population and the sampling size for your survey population, you need to perhaps in some cases expand your view and realize that significant and substantial work is something that other people can use, and more than that 25 people. Significant, substantial means that you're going to produce something, some information that's going to hopefully close the gap in the body of knowledge that you identified, because that gap has created a problem, and you've articulated that problem in Chapter 1 in your general and specific problem. Remember, ideally, a dissertation is going to produce data that's going to then be allowing you to create some information that you can make some conclusions and infer something from or to help other people lessen that problem that you wrote about. As we get into talking about the survey population, much of the information I'm going to share is going to go back to that significant substantial point. Now, I did address some of this information in lesson number 6. If you haven't listened to lesson number 6 yet, I encourage you to go back to lesson number 6, because between lesson number 6 and this lesson, lesson number 10, it should help solidify what it means to address your survey population and sample size in your Chapter 3. Ideally, this lesson is going to help you to solidify these understandings and how to better write your Chapter 3 to be inclusive of all the information that's needed for your work to be approved by your committee members and your university. The survey population, I'll talk about that first, and I'll talk about it first in the quantitative studies. In a quantitative research method, doesn't matter which design you're going to use. You may want to use correlation or maybe using a causality, but the sample size can be determined by using a sample size calculator for a convenience sample. If you're unsure about what a sample size calculation is, I encourage you to go to Google and just put in there, what is a sample size calculation? And you'll find a lot of information. You'll actually see a formula in one of my mentees' work later in this lesson where you can see how he applied a formula for the amount of people he had to be able to get a convenience sample to be able to go to them. You may not be able to survey everybody in a company that has 2,000 or 3,000 people. So therefore you need this calculator to find out what the sample sizes you need to be a fair representation of the whole. Now I will tell you, if possible, if you want to be truly significant and substantial, you may want to look to see, can you survey everybody in the population? I'll give a couple examples. In my dissertation, I did a mixed method study. I did a quantitative survey with 12 questions. There were 835 people who I could have gone to as the sample for my survey. Now I could have did a calculation and figured out what would be a fair representation, but I was able to get the survey to every one of those 800 and some people. So rather than doing the calculation, I got the survey to everybody. A mentee of mine a number of years ago worked at a large corporate organization that had over 10,000 employees. He was able to reach all 10,000 employees through electronic mail with his survey. So he went to every one of them. He had over 7,000 replies that were usable in his data analysis. Now, if he'd have done a fair share statistical sample size, he may have only had a couple hundred. Now, does it make a difference? In part, no, because the sample helps us to realize that that sample would be a fair representation of the whole statistically. But by doing everybody, he helped to eliminate the disparity, which people could say, well, only doing a couple hundred may not be a true representation of the whole, and it could be a limitation of the study. So what he did is he helped improve, if you want to call it, the rigor of his work by interviewing everybody. But you may not be able to do that. So if you're not sure about the survey population in a quantitative study, look at a calculator, the sample size calculator, and put in the numbers based on how many people are potentially in your survey, and then you'll be able to determine what your sample size will be. And I always encourage my mentees, I tell them to be truly significant and substantial, they're going to have to come back with at least 125 usable surveys. That doesn't mean anyone who just kind of did a couple questions, or maybe they did numbers C all the way through, that they literally did the survey. They were usable surveys. If you were to do survey research of 25 people in a small company, you really would not have enough points of data to statistically test something to be truly significant, substantial. I believe, and it's a common belief by many, that if you have at least 125 usable surveys, you'll have perhaps maybe a bell curve or a better distribution of data. So when you run your statistical analysis, you'll be able actually to make conclusions from and infer from to other organizations or to the organizations that are suffering the problem that's being experienced that you related to in your dissertation study. 125 is a good number to look at. Now, if some of my mentees have come back with 100 or 115, have I stopped them? No, of course not. But we tried, or the student tried, to get at least 125. If you're going to do different types of methods in sense of how you're going to distribute your surveys, you have to remember that sometimes you may only get a 15 to 20% return rate. If that's the case, you may have to go to 1,000 or more people to get 125. Now, in my organization that I applied my dissertation through, they had 835 people who were part of the sample. So I went to all of them and found out that I ended up getting well over 300 return surveys. So not only did I exceed what the fair share sample calculator would have provided me, I definitely exceed 125. You may have an opportunity to get more people depending on the situation. For example, through electronic mail, or if you know more of the people in your organization, or your CEO, or the perhaps the superintendent helps to give some sort of recognition and helps encourage people to do your survey, you stand a chance to get a lot more return. But take a look at in general and say, can you get 125 usable surveys? If you can, then I think you're going to have a better chance at supporting that your work is going to be truly significant and substantial. In qualitative work, it's going to depend on the research design. I'll give a couple examples. In phenomenological, for example, it's not uncommon that one would write that they're going to do 20 interviews or until theoretical or data saturation occurs. Theoretical and data saturation basically are the same thing. Theoretical and data means that when no new themes emerge, that the research will stop. Here's an example from one of my mentees. I had my mentee write that they were going to do 20 interviews until data saturation occurs. After the 12th interview, this student put all the information into in vivo software and ran the analysis, and it produced several themes and sub-themes. I told the student, now do 4 more interviews. The student did 4 more interviews and took the results of those other 4 interviews and put them in with the original 12. They ran the data again. They ran the software, and it indicated no new themes. At that point, the student stopped because the student was able to substantiate that data saturation was achieved at number 16. What I also encourage people to do is, if at 16 a new theme or another concept emerged as something new that was not in the original 12, then to do 4 more. Retest it. If no new themes emerge, then stop. If another new one emerged, then you keep going with another 4. This helps to substantiate when data saturation occurs. And it's a little different in a case study. A case study, you're not going to have the same qualifications for all the types of people that are going to be involved in your survey population. So, for example, if you're going to do a case study on how well an emergency trauma center was prepared, you may actually have to talk with several nurses who were on duty at that time. You may have to talk with several nurse leaders who put the training program together, and perhaps the director of nursing. You may have to talk with several physicians, perhaps people who are responsible for giving anesthesia. Perhaps you're going to have to talk with different staff people who help to move people in and out of the emergency room. You may want to talk with the CEO or the chief executive officer of the hospital. You may want to talk with a couple ambulance drivers. In a case study, you're getting multiple views of something that occurred, and therefore maybe you're going to talk with 2 or 3 nurses who were actually involved in the situation, maybe 1 or 2 physicians that were there. Maybe you're only going to be able to talk with 2 ambulance drivers. Perhaps you're going to talk with 1 CEO, because there's only 1 CEO of the hospital, or 1 chief operating officer. You're only going to be able to speak with 1 nurse who's the chief nursing officer. But you're going to have these many different stakeholders, but perhaps you're going to end up with roughly 12 to 20 different interviews anyway to get these multiple perspectives on what happened. Again, it's going to depend on what type of research method and design you're using to determine what your survey population is going to be in the sample size. Again, if you're not at this stage in your proposal development, some of this may seem a little strange, or you haven't figured it all out yet. It's okay. As you get through chapter 1 and then chapter 2, much of this become clearer as you spend more time with your dissertation chair on creating these sections in chapter 3. The unit of analysis is often a question that people are not sure. What does the unit of analysis mean? What I refer to this as is, where's the survey population? For example, if you're going to do a survey of all of the students at Arizona State University, the unit of analysis would be, Arizona State University and the students that are there, not necessarily the faculty or the staff. The unit of analysis would be students at Arizona State University. It may be written as such, where it's students at a large state university in southern Arizona, perhaps. But a unit of analysis is going to be important to you to be able to define Oftentimes, the dissertation chair committee members will ask you, what is the unit of analysis? This is definitely a question that comes up in most oral defenses. I'll often ask, tell me what the unit of analysis was for your study. This is, again, research terminology in a context which you need to be able to understand what it is they're asking about. The unit of analysis, I like to tell my mentees, should be related to the specific problem as well as also related to in the purpose statement. The specific problem is where you're going to find your survey population. If you're going to be doing research at a hospital, as I mentioned, it's going to be a hospital, perhaps it's in Southern California, and the unit of analysis is the people that are involved in the trauma center. And in your purpose statement, it's going to indicate that you're going to do a case study, and it's going to be done in a hospital in Southern California with those stakeholders of the emergency trauma room. Unit of analysis is very important that you're able to define it for your own work. The survey population, there should be no doubt in the reader's mind who is and who is not eligible and included in your survey population. If you're not sure, make sure you can define this. This is another defining moment, if you will, in an oral defense. A lot of people are going to ask, what is your survey population? How was it decided who could and who could not be in your survey population? In the example I gave of working with Arizona State University, if you're going to interview students, well, that survey population is equated to students, and it would not include faculty and staff, and you'd be able to indicate why. If it was in the hospital, you wouldn't necessarily be interviewing people who were in the hospital rooms providing care for those who have gotten out of surgery when your problem that you focused on was what was going on, maybe assessing the efficacy of a trauma center during an emergency situation. So you'd only have people involved in that survey population who were stakeholders of that trauma room. Sampling. There's probability sampling and convenience sampling. These are often, again, terms people don't fully understand early enough in their dissertation research. If you are not certain and you cannot define probability and convenience sampling right now, I encourage you, take a little time once this lesson's over with, then go and do a little research, perhaps go to Google Scholar and ask in there, what is probability sampling or what is convenience sampling, and learn this information. It will save you so much time later. And I can almost guarantee you that in your dissertation oral defense, somebody's probably going to ask you about, did you use probability sampling or convenience sampling? I like to look at probability sampling in the sense of that it's random. That means, anybody has the same chance of being involved in your survey population. You may have to stratify it. There may be some systematic or clusters that are done. Perhaps a cluster is in your state, you have different regions, perhaps they're by different districts or different kind of counties. That might be, you might have these different clusters in your state. So when the political people are doing research, they do a probability sampling, but it's by clusters, and they're looking for a certain amount of people in each of the different districts. Just remember, random and probability tend to go together. And convenience, think of it this way. Who is convenient or accessible in the proximity of where you are? Oftentimes we do research based on where we're at. It's going to be challenging for somebody who lives in New York to do research in Los Angeles unless they're going to go there. That's usually not the case in doctoral dissertation research. Oftentimes we look for convenience sampling, and oftentimes that means who do we know, or can we do it in a company where we work? There's nothing wrong with you doing research in your own company, as long as you have approvals and you count for bias wherever possible and you realize the limitations, then there's nothing wrong with that. Again, when you think about convenience, let's think about convenient. Who's it easy to get to? You need some help? Well, there's great information in Sage Research Methods online into all this information about population and sampling. I encourage you to go online into your electronic libraries and look for Sage Research Methods online. Look at all the information that's there. This is a gold mine, and it's a source that few people actually use. the librarians at any library, whether it be online or otherwise. I always encourage my mentees, go to a regular library, a physical library, a large state university library. They may not let you check books out, but you pay taxes in that state. You can certainly use that facility. ProQuest Dissertations is another great place online. You can go online to your data collection that you have in the databases for your online library and look for ProQuest Dissertations. Download a recent dissertation or two from your university with the same research method and design that you're applying. Look in Chapter 3 under Population and Sampling. Learn how others did it. Learn what's acceptable. Learn how they wrote their information, and then look to emulate that in your own work. And of course, you have these textbooks that you get in your courses. They are very good at providing general information and definitions about population and sampling. Maybe that's enough for you. If you had a great research class and an instructor to help you to better understand it, you may not need the other resources, but they all go together. There's a lot of help out there if you just take the time and become more knowledgeable on what a research population and sample means. And there's always this option for a tutor. There's nothing wrong with hiring a tutor. Most of you are not researchers by trade. You do it because it's part of your academic program. You're an academic researcher. When I went through my study, I had to hire somebody to help me with statistics. I had a mentee who was struggling with her research method and design. She went to a local university and didn't find anybody she wanted to help work with her. She actually went to the research department, was looking for a research assistant or a teaching assistant in the research department, and there was nobody available. So what she did was did an advertisement in Craigslist. She had several people apply. Within 2 weeks, she was sitting down with a tutor 2 hours every Friday afternoon, and literally within a couple months, she not only finished her Chapter 3, got her proposal approved, collected her data, and finished Chapter 4 as well. A research tutor might be somebody you need to get help from. If you do, then consider it if you can. Now I'll share several examples from some of my mentees who have had their works approved, and they're already doctors, they have their credentials, and they have given me written consent to use their work for this program to help you learn from their work. I encourage you, if you find their work of interest, and if it's the same research method and design that you are using, consider going to ProQuest Dissertations and download their dissertations and read them all the way through. Patricia Schroeder, in her 2013 dissertation titled A Quantitative Correlation Study of Individualism, Collectivism, and Employee Innovation in Turkey, shared information about her population and sampling in this manner. She wrote, Hofstede indicated that a minimum number of respondents necessary to eliminate individual statistical influence are 20, with an ideal respondent number of 50. The research study was administered at Karaka Language School and Turgut Özal University in Anarka, Turkey, with a minimum of 140, at least 20 from each of the 7 regions, completed surveys of the study goal. Understand here, this is a dissertation, so she's writing about in the past tense, but she would be alluding to basically the same information in the future tense in her proposal. She continued with information that said the study's sample population consisted of employed Turkish students who were enrolled in either the Karaka Language School or Turgut Özal University. You can see here her survey population, who was allowed, and we know if people were not employed there, then they weren't allowed to be in the study. Study participants were individuals who self-reported working for either the public or private organization in Turkey. Turkish employees, teachers, and administrators at both locations were also invited to participate in the survey. The study's population included individuals who were currently employed and grew up in various regions in Turkey, allowing for regional comparisons. This is where, perhaps as I mentioned before, where there's this cluster sampling, where you can do by different regions and do comparisons. She continued on in her Chapter 3, with stratification was also used to ensure that the sample was representative of the 7 regions in Turkey. She indicated a citation there. The 7 regions within Turkey range in population from 5 million to 12 million, with a total country population of about 70 million in 2009. You can see where she got her statistic. It was very current. Hofstede recommended that sample size should be no lower than 20, with an ideal sample comprised of 50. A minimum of 20 respondents from each of the 7 regions for a total of 140 study participants were the goal provided in the regional comparisons. So you're able to see from her how it worked. Now, Dr. Joseph Hagee and his 2013 dissertation award-winning study titled Influence of Religion and Religiosity on Leadership Practices in the Workplace, a Quantitative Correlation Study, went in depth in his work, and I'm pretty sure that's why he won the Dissertation of the Year award. This study utilized probability, simple random sampling techniques for the initial collection of data to ensure that Christians and Muslims in the population were fairly represented in the sample, and he highlighted Salkin's work in 2003. The following formula was used to determine the appropriate sample size representing a given population. Now, he highlights this author's work here, so if you wanted to use that same formula, you could. And you would see the formula here that he puts together. Now, I'm not going to read this all to you, but you can see that there's an actual formula at the top. And then what he did lower at the bottom is put all the information in that he had to be able to understand that the outcome that he needed 381 people to be able to do his survey, or actually 382 by the time he rounded it. And he gave the information here about the sample size calculation, and the 381.9 was rounded up to 382, and then he went into providing Cochrane sample formula for categorizing data. And here's the formula, and he provides the outcome in his own work later on. The sample size was rounded down from 384.16 to 384. Because the computed recommended sample does not exceed 5% of the population, there was no need for a correction formula to recalculate the sample size. It talks about it at Barrett ETL 2001. There's information there. You can see what he used to guide his choices. An additional number was added to the sample size to allow for exclusions resulting from a lie scale and dropouts from the survey taking process. Now, if you don't know what a lie scale is, well, you might want to take a look at that and be able to understand that and how he applied it. Now, I want to share one example from a qualitative study, which Dr. Susan Kristeniak in 2011 did, her work titled Exploring the Experiences of Complementary Therapy Nurses, a Qualitative Phenomenological Study. She wrote, the sample population for this study was nurses who have completed complementary therapy education in areas of Reiki, aromatherapy, and guided imagery. The hospital in Abilington, Pennsylvania, has developed an integrative nursing council based on a shared governance model of nursing leadership and empowerment. But right from the beginning, in this first sentence, you can gain a sense of who was allowed to be in that sample population. They have had to have completed those types of therapies. Participants interviewed for this study were selected from the Mid-Atlantic Hospital in Abilington, Pennsylvania. This 660-bed acute care community teaching hospital serves a 5-county area in suburban Philadelphia. We're starting to see how she alludes to her unit of analysis. A convenience sample of 30 nurses was proposed for the completion of this research study, and the actual number of participants was determined when theoretical saturation of themes occurred. Convenience sampling, referred to as voluntary sampling, is used in qualitative research when participants are needed to come forward for the research study. And then she cites where convenience sampling came from, this volunteering sampling from Pollock and Beck in 2006, another source which might be helpful for you. According to Cresswell, qualitative research involves the study of a few individuals or cases to elicit an in-depth experience of the individuals and can range from 1 to as many as 40. However, saturation can occur with as few as 10 participants. Remember, she indicated that she had a survey population that she started with of 30. Saturation occurs when the identified major themes evolve and no new information can add to these existing themes. At that point, the data collection process, the identification of saturation, is a subjective research decision made by the researcher. As I indicated in a lot of my work, I have my students do 12 interviews. At the end of 12 interviews, I have them run the data in vivo software if they do it manually to produce it otherwise. then to go do 4 more. Include that 4 additional interviews into the original 12. If no new themes occur, then I tell them they can stop. They have been able to identify that saturation achieved. If a new theme emerged, then I would ask them to do 4 more. And the same choices would be made. If no new information, no new themes came out, they could stop. If not, do 4 more. Chapter 3 reflects critical thinking. It shows your discerning knowledge of research. When you're identifying who is in the survey population, how you are able to identify the sample size for your research, then that will show your discerning knowledge of research. It will also help to indicate that you are a subject matter expert. As I continue to enforce in Chapter 3, you have to give evidence in your writing that you have some subject matter expertise, that you're able to relate what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and the rationale for what you want to do. When you can ensure that all 3 of those are there, you're going to have a very good proposal and it's going to get approved. The end result is that your Chapter 3, along with the other chapters in your proposal, is going to inform others of your choices and rationale for your choices. Again, it goes back to critical thinking, that you're going to be able to indicate why you're going to do what you're going to do, and more importantly, you're going to give the rationale for how you determined your survey population. Remember, if you can answer the question very clearly, what are the qualifications for people to be in your survey population, to the exact detail of who is and who is not, if you can answer that question, then you've got a good understanding and you're ready to go. Just make sure it's articulated as such in your chapter so other people can understand it. And we're talking about what kind of details in Chapter 3? Yes, we're going to talk about excruciating details all the time. That when you can give that information for people to understand what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and why you're going to do what you're going to do, you have your excruciating details covered. As part of the reflective summary, I gave some information about the survey population and sampling, gave some evidence and some choice definitions. Again, if you don't understand completely what a survey population is, then perhaps spend a little extra time reading about it. If you're not sure about sampling techniques, again, spend a little time learning about it as it pertains in general to research, but also more importantly, how it relates to your research method and design. I also shared some examples from my prior mentees. Again, the work from Dr. Schroeder, Dr. Hagee, and Dr. Kristeniak, they're all worthy of emulation. I encourage you, if you found value in their work, and in particular if you're doing a quantitative study, I highlight Dr. Joseph Hagee's work because it is detailed. Every chapter has excruciating details. And he won the 2013 Dissertation of the Year Award for a quantitative study. If you were able to emulate his work, I'm sure you'll have no problem getting your work approved. I do believe that education is a lot like life, as I believe your proposal and dissertation is as well. The more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. I hope you found this lesson helpful and that you'll be able to take the information, put it into your work, and get your proposal and dissertation approved sooner than it would be otherwise. This is the program titled Taking the B Out of ABD. If you find this information helpful, please share the information about the webinars and on my website where people could procure their own lesson plan. Please do not send these lessons to other people. There is a copyright on it, and I encourage you to protect that on my behalf and not do something that's illegal. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Thank you very much.